Would you get the back half? I'll keep a microphone up there for the front end. Thank you. You notice only half the teachers are here, not by weight or size, but by voice. Adam is sick, so we only have half the teachers. That doesn't mean the class will be half as long. It means it'll probably be longer because I'll be slower covering the material than when we're both up here. We love doing that because while one's talking, the other one's looking over the notes of what they're going to say next and vice versa. So we just kind of keep on going, and we ask each other questions as we teach. We like doing it that way, but we're going to have it a little different this morning. But let's begin class with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your beautiful morning. We thank you for all the blessings we enjoy in this life. We thank you for the fall weather that we can enjoy, and we thank you for our night's rest, that we could wake up this morning refreshed and ready to study from your word and ready to worship you a little bit later. We pray, Father, that you would be with us and all the other classes and the other teachers as we learn more about you and more about how you deal with your people. We pray all this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. We are in 1 Samuel 4. Israel's defeat, God's victory is the title. This is going to be, we end up in the first 3 chapters. Samuel receives a call from God. He relays God's message to Eli that basically Eli's house, his lineage for the high priest is going to come to an end, and even more immediate that he and his 2 sons will die. We're going to see that come to fruition in the next 3 chapters. But these chapters start off, Samuel is a little older than he was at the end of chapter 3. Now he is a judge. We know that as we're reading through here, Eli was a judge for 40 years. He died at the age of 98, so that means he didn't become a judge till he was about 58. Now, I don't think that Samuel was probably 58 before he became a judge, but he was definitely older than 12. So we're not sure exactly how old he is here, but we see, I didn't test well, we're not going to look at that because Adam's not here. You can email Adam, but I doubt you are going to get a response if you text him. So we're looking at the faithful Word of God. But something I want to talk about here is the fact that the Ark of the Covenant is going to be mentioned at least 35 times in these 3 chapters. And we call it the Ark of the Covenant. Some of your versions may say the Ark of the Testimony. Do any of you have Bibles that say the Ark of the Testimony instead of the Ark of the Covenant? But it very seldom says just the Ark. It always says the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of the Testimony. And what that is referring to is that the Ark not only is the place that represented to the Israelites the throne of God, that it represented the place that God actually spoke to them from. We're going to look over in a minute at Exodus chapter 25. God speaks to Moses from, when Moses goes up before the Ark, he speaks to him, I guess that's technically not true because Exodus 25, God is telling him how to build the ark and the description of how to build the ark. So he wasn't hearing from the ark at that point. But anyway, the ark is, it represents God's testimony. And the things they put in the ark represented that. If you look at Exodus 25, we're not going to go over there and read it, but verses 10 through 16 describe how to Moses, God describes to him how to build the ark. And then in verse 16, it tells what the contents of the ark are. You know, the ark is basically a wooden box that is covered in gold, and it's going to have some items inside of it. And in verse 16, it says, "And you shall put into the ark the testimony." So that's why it's called the Ark of the Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, because it's God's covenant with his people. The Ark of you shall put into the ark the testimony which I shall give you. And the testimony in chapter 31 of Exodus, verse 18, it says the 2 tablets of the testimony. What are the 2 tablets of the testimony? That's the 2 tablets that God, with his finger, wrote the 10 commandments on. And that is considered God's testimony to his people, his commandments. So that's this testimony or this covenant that God made with his people. And so these tablets of stone written by the finger of God, that is what's in the ark. And then if you look at chapter 16 of Exodus, verse 34, they're told to take a jar and place in it some of the manna so that they would have that represented for all time of how God provided for his people in the wilderness and fed them on a daily basis. And so but when you read that, it says, place this before the testimony. In other words, it was to sit outside the ark right there next to it. And then the third thing that was in the ark, anybody remember? Aaron's rod that budded, supernaturally by the power of God. And that was to be placed in the ark. Or we're told in Exodus 30, Numbers 17, verses 8 through 10, the budding rod of Aaron is to be placed before the testimony. But if you go over to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4, Hebrews tells you there are 3 things in the ark. So at some point, you had the 2 stones, you had the jar of manna, and you had the budding rod all placed inside the ark. Now, whether that was the case in the time of Samuel or not, I don't know. But at some point in their worship, with the ark in the temple and in the tabernacle, all 3 of those were placed in the ark. And then in chapter 25 of Exodus, continuing from where they had the directions, verse 21, it says, and you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony which I shall give to you. And where did I put my Bible? I thought I had it back here. I do. So Exodus 25:22. This is where Adam would have been talking and I would have been turning. So 25:22, and there I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you about all that I will give you in commandment for the sons of Israel. So it's always referred to as the ark of testimony or the ark of the covenant. And then if you go over to chapter 40 of Exodus, I just want to, all of this information about the ark is going to come into play as we read through these 3 chapters in 1 Samuel. So I kind of wanted to cover some of this. So then in Exodus 40, verses 20 and 21, it says, then he took the testimony and put it into the ark, the testimony meaning the 2 tablets, and attached the poles to the ark and put the mercy seat on top of the ark. So this is talking about when the temple's erected and how they treated the ark of the testimony, the ark of the covenant. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle, verse 21, and set up a veil for the screen and screened off the ark of the testimony, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay? Now then, it had to have a veil around it because the Israelites weren't even to look at the ark. Okay? And when they transported it, they took that veil that surrounded it and basically partitioned that as the most holy place, or the holy of holies, and outside of that was the holy place. And inside of that, only one person was allowed to go, the high priest, and then only once a year. And then he had to prepare himself and offer sacrifices for himself to cleanse himself before he could even go in, because the ark was considered that holy. But whenever it was in the tabernacle and they had to move the tabernacle and transport it, there were detailed instructions about that. They were to take, the high priest was to go in, he was to burn incense, and the incense was to create a cloud to kind of create this mist around the ark. And then he was to take this veil, that made for the Holy of Holies, and use it to cover the ark to where nobody was to see the ark. And he even had a veiled view of the ark. He covered the ark, and then they took the translation says porpoise skins, and those were used in the roof of the tabernacle, and they were to cover the veil with that. And then they were to put the rods along either side of it, and then they could transport the ark. Okay, but they were to take very careful care that nobody ever saw the ark but the high priest once a year. Okay, and when it wasn't that once a year, he was to burn this incense to try and even veil him looking at the ark more than the once a year. Okay, so it was considered, and God had punishments for the Israelites if they didn't follow these instructions. Okay. All of this is leading up to what's going to happen in the next 3 chapters. Okay, so, Leviticus 16, verses 2 through 17 are Aaron's requirements to enter the Holy of Holies, like I said, one time per year, and how he was to do it in such a way that he could avoid death. Numbers 4, verses 5 and 6. Let me just read that. I can't summarize it well enough. Numbers 4, 4 verses 5 and 6. When the camp sets out, now this is when the ark resided in the tabernacle, Aaron and his sons shall go in, and they shall take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of the testimony with it, and they shall lay a covering of porpoise skin on it, and they shall spread over it a cloth of pure blue. Now I had left that out. And shall insert its poles. And then that's how they are to transport it. And then following it were all the other furnishings in the tabernacle. And then if you go over to Numbers, a couple more chapters, Numbers 7, the very last verse of Numbers 7, you'll probably never guess how many verses are in Numbers 7 if you haven't turned over there. It's verse 89. Now when Moses went into the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard the voice speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 cherubim. So he spoke to him. And then all of chapter 8, all of chapter 9, the first 10 verses or so of chapter 10 is the Lord speaking to Moses from above the mercy seat. Okay, now we get over to chapter 10. And the first 10 verses, it says, the Lord spoke further to Moses saying, make yourself 2 trumpets. Now, this was not mentioned earlier in the furnishings of the tabernacle, but he's telling him, make 2 trumpets of hammered work, you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation and for having the camps set out. And it tells about how you're to blow them and the different signals that meant and so forth. But then you get down to verse 9 of Numbers 10, it says, and when you go to war in your land against the adversary who attacks you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God and be saved from your enemies. Also in the day of your gladness and in your appointed feasts and on the first days of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Now, verse 9 there, what are they to take with them when they go into battle? Was it the ark? No, it was the 2 trumpets they were to take. They missed this part when we get over to Samuel, okay? Now, that's not to mean that they have never taken the ark. Does anybody remember a time that the ark went before the people when they went into battle? Jericho, when they fought the battle in Jericho, God commanded them to take the ark then. And he said, take the ark, you march around 7 times, you do this for 7 days. I'm getting the details mixed up, but on the 7th day, the walls fall down. But the ark goes in front of the people during that process. And the ark goes in front of the people because the Lord commanded it. What's different here in this story that we're going to see as we read through chapters 4, 5, and 6 is God did not command it. The only thing God commanded them to take were 2 trumpets. They decided on their own, we lost this first battle, Send somebody back to Shiloh and get the 2 trumpets that we forgot? No. Send them back to get the ark. And don't bother covering it. Don't bother wrapping it in the veil or the blue cloth of silk or the porpoise skins or any of that. Just put the poles in it and trot it on out here. And we'll take it into battle with us. And for the years leading up to this battle, how had they been treating God in his temple? Had Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, been worshiping God the way they were supposed to? No, God was upset with the people. And if you look over in Deuteronomy where it talks about the curses and the blessings, one of the curses, they were the ones that should have been punished and not the Philistines that we'll see in chapter 6. Okay, I'm not going to finish this, and Adam would have told me about 10 minutes ago that I need to hurry up. So, chapter 4. Thus the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped beside Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped in Aphek. Now, let's get a better map. That's pretty small. You probably can't see that, but this is blowing up. You see up at the top, Aphek was the northernmost city of Philistia. Okay, and it's roughly 2.5 to 3 miles away from Ebenezer, which is in the border, and that's on the border, and that's an Israelite city. And so that's where their army camped, and the Philistines were in Aphek. Okay, so the Philistines drew up in battle again, array to meet Israel. Verse 2, when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. So they lost 4,000 men that day. When the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take." Now, I've highlighted that in green, and we're going to see that word later, but I just want to point it out right here. They took the ark from Shiloh, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, or the ark of the testimony, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. It didn't dawn on them, the reason we've lost is because we're an idolatrous people and we're not obeying God the way we should. We need to turn back to God and then he will give us victory again. They thought, no, the reason we're losing is because our good luck charm, is the way they're looking at the ark, was not with us. We need to go back and get it and then we'll win. Well, let's see if they're right. So the people sent to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim, and the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. Okay, so a little bit about this map, and then we'll go on to the rest of chapter 4. So you can see, gotta find my pointer. The Philistines were called they had 5 lords. It was called the Pentapolis, 5 cities. And so the 5 lords were from Gaza, Askelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. And then the rest of this yellow is part of Philistia. And then, of course, here's Beth Shemesh, where the ark is going to end up at. But up here is where the battle takes place, between Aphek and Ebenezer. And they sent back to Shiloh, and between Shiloh and Ebenezer, that's about 19 or 20 miles. So they carried the ark that distance, and they carried it into battle. And so now let's see what happens in this battle. As the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout. So they thought, hey, we've got the ark, now we're going to win. So the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, "What does the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. The Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who shall deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods?" Now the Philistines were polytheistic. They thought of the Israelites, one true God, as a multiplicity of gods. So they said, "These are the gods who smote the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness." Now they weren't correct, but that was just their view of things. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been slaves to you. Therefore, be men and fight. So they didn't cower at this. Now, they're going to cower later when we get to chapter 7, but that's in 2 weeks. I would say it's next week, but next week we're concluding our lectureship. This is a plug for the lectureship. Starts Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Saturday. Please come. It's going to be wonderful. And Richard's going to say more about that later. Okay, now then, Hophni and Phinehas carried the ark into battle. I've got a representation of what it looked like when Hophni and Phinehas carried the ark, roughly. I don't know which one's Hophni and which one's Phinehas. I don't think either one wore a fedora, but that is probably an accurate representation of what the ark looked like. So Adam put this in, but he told me I could take credit for it, but I'm not sure I want to. So then verse 10 of chapter 4. So the Philistines fought and Israel was defeated. So this is the second defeat. And every man fled to his tent, and the slaughter was very great, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. The first battle they lost 4,000 without the ark. Now with the ark they lose 30,000. Is God trying to send them a message? You're not fighting the way you should be fighting. You're not thinking of me the way you should be thinking. And the ark of God was taken. Now the Israelites took the ark out of Shiloh. The Philistines take the ark. It's the same word there, the same Hebrew word for taking the ark. So it was when the Philistines took the ark out of Israel's presence, they took the ark out of God's tabernacle. The Israelites did. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died in the battle. Okay. Now a man of Benjamin came from the battle and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came, behold, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, eagerly watching because his heart was trembling for the ark of God. So the man came to tell it in the city, and the city cried out. So he didn't come right to Eli. He came to the most populous part of Shiloh, announced this. The people all got upset. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, "What does the noise of this commotion mean?" Then the man came hurriedly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. He probably had bad cataracts. I'm not sure, but he had gone blind. He could not see. The man said to Eli, "I am the one who came from the battle line. Indeed, I have escaped from the battle line today." And he said, "How did things go, my son?" Then the one who brought the news replied, "Israel has fled before the Philistines." In other words, we lost. "And there has also been a great slaughter among the people, 30,000. And your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, have died." And then the final blow that gave Eli probably a heart attack, but he fell over backwards and broke his neck. The Ark of the Covenant has been taken. When he mentioned the Ark of God, Eli fell off the seat backwards beside the gate. His neck was broken, and he died. He was old and heavy. Thus he judged Israel 40 years. An interesting comment there. One of the commentaries said, the reason he was, of course he's old because he's 98. The reason he was heavy is because they ate too much of the meat from the sacrifices that they shouldn't have been eating. But I don't know. That was a stretch. But so he had judged for 40 years. Then this is interesting. Probably the most spiritual person in their family. It wasn't Hophni. It wasn't Phinehas. It wasn't Eli. It was his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife. She was pregnant and about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the Ark of God was taken and that her father-in-law and her husband had died, she kneeled down and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women who stood by her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have given birth to a son." So she died in childbirth, but before she died, she named her child. She did not answer or pay attention, and she called the boy Ichabod. Now, most of you don't know that Ichabod was an Old Testament name, that you think of Ichabod Crane. Was that the name of the teacher in New England that Hawthorne? Anyway, That doesn't matter. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God was taken. So they considered not just the tabernacle, but specifically the ark as being their glory. And the glory of God. And I need to get back to find the place where I'm at. So they suffered these losses, and if you look at Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26, both of those contain curses that God says for the people, and those curses would fall upon the people if they were disobedient. And here they were showing ultimately signs of disobedience, and so they were cursed, and they suffered these losses. And I really don't flip my pages very well when I'm talking, so I'm way behind. Okay. So the wicked sons of Eli thought that their scheme of bringing the ark into battle would save the glory of God, but what it did was it took the glory of God away, and it went into the hands of the Philistines. Now then, that's the punishment of the Israelites. Now we come to the Philistines. They think that we've won this battle. To celebrate winning this battle, we'll take the most important thing from the Israelites, their Ark of the Testimony, their Ark of the Covenant, and we'll bring it back home with us. And so, I showed you those 5 cities, and so they take it first to Ashdod. And it says, now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Now, Ebenezer was where the battle was. This is where you get from the song, Now I Raise My Ebenezer. It was taken from this city, but more importantly, not just this city where the Israelites were camped when they went into battle against the Philistines in Aphek, but also later on we're going to see when the Israelites ultimately win that battle, Samuel is going to raise a stone to the glory of God, and he will call that stone Ebenezer. And he raises that stone, but it's in the same location as the city of Ebenezer, so that's why they called it Ebenezer, and that's why the song we sing says, here I raise my Ebenezer, and it's talking about the fact that God answered them, and it's a stone of help. So anyway, now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Now, who is Dagon? That's the Philistine god. Now, some people say he was the father of Baal. Well, Baal was the Canaanites' god, one of their main gods, not their only god. They were polytheistic. But Dagon is this, and Dagon, it's interesting. It's a dag in Hebrew is fish. And they have found examples of what this god Dagon looked like, and he was half man and half fish. And they describe it as from the waist down he looked like a mermaid, and from the waist up he looked like a man, but he had like a Sumerian beard. And I don't know if you know what a Sumerian beard is, but it's this kind of squared beard. It's all curly, and so it's a very odd looking statue of this god. And so they brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when the Ashdodites rose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. What a coincidence. There must have been an earthquake. So what did they do? They took Dagon and set him back up in his place again. And when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. This time he didn't just fall. he fell and broke apart. And not only did he break apart, but it's not like his head just rolled a few feet off from the front of his body and his arms went, fell by the sides. No, those were way over here at the end of the temple on the threshold. It was like somebody had moved them there. Who do you think moved them there? Both the palms of the hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore, neither the priests of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. That's a what do you call that? It's not tradition. Superstition. It was a superstition. They would step over the threshold. They would not step on it. It's from this that a lot of our superstitions today. Don't step on a crack or you'll break your mother's back. How many of you have been told when you were a kid and you were riding in your dad's pickup and you go across railroad tracks, you're supposed to pick up your feet or something bad's going to happen if your feet are on the floorboard when you go over the railroad track? Am I the only one? Those kind of superstitions come from this, okay? You didn't realize it, so you might want to give up those superstitions because that's a superstition of Dagon worshipers, okay? So anyway, just kind of, and another thing about the Philistines. If you go back over here, I'm going to flip back real quick and I will never find my place again. See Philistia? If I was to superimpose this over a modern day map of Israel, where Gaza, Ascalon, and Ashdod, well, especially Gaza and Ascalon, that bottom half of that's Gaza. Who lives in Gaza? Palestinians. Palestine and Philistia. Palestine comes from the word Philistia. They are related. The Palestinians are descendants of the Philistines. How long have they been at odds with one another? A long time. A long time. Anyway, get back to where I was. Vindicating power of God. We got Dagon there. The book of Samuel mentions the Philistines 150 times. The books of Samuel, if you take 1st and 2nd Samuel combined. They had sought to control their land, and they were some of the last ones that David was able to drive out of the land when they finally. Joshua conquered the land, but they never fully ejected all of their enemies out of the land. And some of the last ones to leave were the Amorites and the Philistines. And the Philistines, I think, were even after the Amorites. Okay. So, I shared that about Dagon. So now then, after this happened to their god, Dagon, and I might point out also, I don't know where I had that, but the original, maybe I haven't come to it yet, the original temple to Dagon was not in Ashdod. Do you remember a judge that was chained to some pillars in a temple? Who was that? Who was that judge? Samson? Who was that temple to? Dagon? What did Samson do to that temple? With God's help. Well, what did God do to that temple using Samson? Was probably a better way to say that. Destroyed the temple. They had to move it from, it was either Gath or Gaza, had to move it from there, and they rebuilt their temple to Dagon at Ashdod. So it's in a different location, but it's still in one of the 5 main cities of the Canaanites. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them. Now, ravage is a pretty strong term. Think of the plagues that fell upon the Egyptians. You're going to see some plagues now falling upon the Philistines. And why? because they've taken God's covenant, his ark of the testimony, and brought it into their house. And God's saying, no, 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 you don't treat me that way. They were saying to the Israelites, nah, 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 your God's not as strong as ours, and God's going to prove them wrong. So he smote them with tumors. Now, some of you may have hemorrhoids. These tumors were probably in about the same location you would get hemorrhoids. Now, he also smote them, we're going to see, and I may not have time to read all this, but he also smote them with mice, which could also be translated as rats. And the Philistines were a seagoing people. They traveled a lot by ship. What do you transport in ships a lot of times? In the holds of these ships? Rats. And what do those rats carry? Plague. A lot of people see that maybe this, with the mice and the tumors, maybe these mice transported, and it wasn't just, when I first read this, I thought, oh, these little white mice ran through their fields and ate their wheat. It may be that they transmitted something like the, how do I say that, Vicki? Bubonic plague. And when you get the bubonic plague, one of the effects of the bubonic plague is you get tumors in your groin. I don't know which is worse, the hemorrhoids or the tumors in your groin from the bubonic plague. But the people, the Philistines were dying. And it was only happening in Ashdod because that's where the ark of God was. So the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, and they said, the ark of God must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of God of Israel be brought around to Gath. We'll share it with our friends, the Lord of Gath and his city. And maybe it's just a coincidence that this plague has fallen upon us, and these tumors and so forth, and the hemorrhoids, whatever you want to call them, it was bad. And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around. After they brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against that city with very great confusion. And he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so the tumors broke out on them. Some versions say hemorrhoids, but I like tumors. Hemorrhoids could be included in tumors, but tumors can also mean more than just a hemorrhoid. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. So the people of Gath said, no, we don't want it here. So they sent it to the third city. Well, I'll cut the story short here. They don't send it around to all 5 cities. It gets to the third one, and they say, maybe this is a coincidence that this is happening to each of our cities as we bring the ark in. But in case it's not, we better get rid of it. So they sent, verse 11, and gathered all the lords of the Philistines, those 5 lords, and they said, send away the ark of Israel and let it return to its own place so that it will not kill us and our people. For there was a, excuse me, I'm sorry. For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. I was going to comment on that, but I'm running out of time. The hand of God was heavy there, and the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So there were lots of them that died, but you were the lucky one if you only got the tumors. So anyway, so they come up with this idea, what they're going to do. Chapter 6. So the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines for 7 months between these 3 cities. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we shall send it to its place. And they said, if you send away the ark of the Lord, the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but you shall surely return to him a guilt offering. So they have to make a guilt offering. And this guilt offering is going to be a golden mice, there's going to be 5, so it will be golden mices, and golden hemorrhoids or tumors. So each city was to make one of these, and I'm not sure how big they were, but out of gold, a tumor and a mouse, and they were to put those with the ark, not inside the ark, but with the ark, on the cart that they're sending back to the Israelites. And they're saying, and basically, I'm going to summarize here. Basically, they say, in case this is just a coincidence that this is happening in these 3 cities that it happens to be in over these 7 months, we're going to send it back a certain way. And if it doesn't go back into the Israelites' land, then we'll return these guilt offerings, and you guys will all get your gold back. But if it is true, so they hook up to this cart that they put the ark on. The ark's not supposed to be transported that way, but that's the way the Philistines don't know any better. They transport it on this cart. They hook up to this cart 2 milk cows, or the Bible says milch cows, but milch cows are milk cows that are nursing calves. These cows have never pulled a cart before. 1 strike against them. 2, their calves are left at home, lowing for their moms, or bawling for their moms, and the moms are lowing for their calves. And a mom is not usually going to go the opposite direction from its calf. It's going to want to go to the calf because it's got to feed it. Strike 2 against this happening. And we'll set this right here on the beginning of this road, and if it takes this road and all the turns and goes into the Israelite land, then we'll know that this was God that did this to us, and we'll know that he deserves this guilt offering, and we'll be rid of this ark finally. But if these milch cows, do anything but return it to the Israelites, we'll know that it was just a coincidence that this happened to us, and we'll return to all of you your gold. Okay, so that's basically what that was about. And then, why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and the Pharaohs hardened their hearts when he dealt with them? And I got to get to my notes again. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, it's interesting because the cows do just what they should do. Now, God wasn't the God of the Philistines, but he was the God of the cows. And the cows, just what their nature told them to return to their calves. Their nature told them to return to their barn. Their nature wouldn't have told them to pull a cart. It wouldn't have told them to go to the Israelite land. But they did all those things because they were listening to God and not to anybody else. And they go up to the town of Beth Shemesh, verse 9. And Beth Shemesh was a Levitical city. It had Levites in it, so they knew what to do with this. Except in these 7 months, what has probably happened, and Samuel doesn't discuss it, but Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, has been destroyed. Now, we think that the furnishings and all of the parts of the tabernacle were probably packed up and hidden, but the city of Shiloh has been destroyed, so there's no place to take the ark back to. So they set it up on a stone, and they offer as a sacrifice these 2 milch cows before the altar. Now, again, they don't know their law very well because you're supposed to offer bullocks, male cows. You're not supposed to offer milk cows as sacrifices, but that's what they do because that's what they have handy, and the Lord accepts their sacrifice when they do that. And that's here in this section. They offer them as a burnt offering. And they also offered the articles of gold, and they put all of that on this large stone at Beth Shemesh. When the lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. They got out of there. These are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned for a guilt offering to the Lord, 1 for each of the 5 cities, and the golden mice according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both of the fortified cities and country villages. So that implies that maybe there were more than just 5 mice. But anyway, the large stone on which they set the Ark of the Covenant was in a field of Joshua in Beth Shemesh, the holy wrath of God. Now, if the Israelites had turned back to God, that would have been one thing. I read all that to you at the beginning about how they were to treat the Ark. They were not even to look upon the Ark. What did they do? He struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked not on the Ark, they looked into the Ark. Hey, it's reported that it has this, this, and this in here. Let's see. And they looked into it. Nobody was supposed to even touch the ark, let alone look on it or look into it, except for the high priest once a year. And the penalty was death. It says that he struck down 50,070 men. Now then, this is where the commentators disagree, because the Hebrews don't have numbers in their alphabet. They use letters. And there's some confusion here. Was it really 50,000? Were there even 50,000 men that lived in Beth Shemesh? We don't know. It could have been 50,000 men. It could be that they added an extra letter somewhere along the way and it was only 70 men. And some people think that that's likely that it was the 70 men, because would it really take 50,000 men to look in there and drop dead before somebody decided, maybe we shouldn't look in here anymore? But if 70 men looked in there, they all gathered around, they were looking in there, and then pretty soon they all dropped dead, everybody else is going to say, oh, we need to leave this thing alone. I'm not saying what the number is, but we do know that it was a large number of men that died from looking into the ark. And now we're going to so then they decide to take it to Kiriath Jearim, which is another Levitical city, and that's where it stays for over 20 years until it ends up going to Nob, where they re-erected the tabernacle, and then later, when Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, it went to there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to all of my application at the end, but very interesting story. Obedience is important, and we got people coming in, so I need to stop. So thank you very much for your time.